Hi, and welcome to the Archive of History. Imagine standing on ancient stone as the first light of dawn breaks over endless mountains. The air is thin and cold here, sharp enough to burn your lungs with each breath. Beneath your feet, weathered grey stones stretch in both directions, rising and falling with the contours of the earth like a serpent frozen in time. This is the Great Wall of China, and you are standing on perhaps the most ambitious construction project in human history. It is a structure so vast that it cannot be comprehended from any single vantage point, so ancient that its origins disappear into legend, and so enduring that it has outlasted the very empires that built it. Tonight we will experience what life was truly like on this impossible barrier between civilization and wilderness, between order and chaos, between the known world and the endless steppes beyond. Before we drift off, I am always curious to know where my listeners are tuning in from and what time it is that they are listening tonight. Let me know in the comments. This is not a story of emperors and grand strategy, though those elements are present. This is a story of cold mornings and aching muscles, of millet porridge eaten in darkness before the work begins, of watchfires burning through frozen nights, of letters that never reach home, and of the countless individuals whose names are lost but whose labor remains embedded in every carefully placed stone. We will walk in the footsteps of the conscripted laborers who hauled massive blocks up impossible mountain slopes. We will stand watch in isolated towers where soldiers spent years of their lives scanning the horizon for threats that might never come. We will feel the weight of distance from loved ones, the grinding monotony of garrison duty, and the sudden terror when beacon fires blazed to signal approaching danger. The Great Wall is often called one of the wonders of the world, and this is true, but to understand it properly, we must set aside the photographs of perfectly restored sections crowded with tourists, and instead imagine the reality of this structure when it was a living, functioning part of an empire's defense. We must picture it not as a monument, but as a workplace, a home, a prison, and a lifeline all at once. We must see it through the eyes of those who built it stone by stone, who maintained it season after season, and who defended it against enemies both real and imagined. The wall you are standing on stretches for thousands of miles across northern China, though the exact distance is almost impossible to calculate, because the wall is not a single structure, but a network of walls built and rebuilt over more than 2,000 years. Some sections are made of rammed earth, pounded into place by thousands of hammers until it became harder than stone. Others are constructed from fired brick and mortar, their surfaces still bearing the fingerprints of the workers who placed them centuries ago. Still others are built from whatever local stone could be quarried, fitted together with such precision that no mortar was needed at all. The wall climbs mountain peaks so steep that it seems to defy gravity, crosses desert sands where the wind constantly threatens to bury it, and winds through river valleys where flash floods have carved away foundations that took years to establish. Tonight we will travel back in time to the Ming Dynasty, to the 16th century, when the Great Wall as we know it today was being constructed and maintained in its most extensive and elaborate form. This was the era when the wall truly became great, when older sections were reinforced and expanded, when new stretches were built to connect ancient fortifications, when the brick-faced walls and elaborate watchtowers that define our image of the structure were raised across the northern frontier. But we will also look deeper into the older layers of history to understand how this immense project began and why it continued for so many generations. Now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Close your eyes and let yourself drift back across the centuries to a time when the world was divided not by invisible lines on maps, but by walls of stone and earth, by the distance a man could walk in a day, and by the reach of a signal fire's light across the darkness. Let us travel together to the Great Wall of China, and let us experience what it was truly like to live, work, and die in the shadow of this impossible monument to human ambition and endurance. The story begins, not on the wall itself, but in a small village in the fertile plains south of Beijing. In the early morning darkness of a spring day, in the year 1568, you are a peasant farmer, 23 years old, and you are being taken from your home. Now step back from the immediate experience of labor and garrison duty, and consider the Great Wall in the broader sweep of history, in the way it transformed from a vital military necessity into the symbol it has become. Understanding this transformation is to understand something profound about how civilizations change, how their monuments outlast their purposes, and how meaning shifts across centuries. The wall you helped to build, the wall you garrisoned, was at the time a practical structure with a practical purpose. It was infrastructure, no different in essence from a road or a granary, just another tool the empire used to organize and defend its territory. The soldiers who died building it, the workers who gave years of their lives to its construction, did not think of themselves as creating a wonder of the world. They thought of themselves as fulfilling obligations, doing their duty, enduring hardship because that was what was required of them. But even during its active use, the wall carried symbolic weight. It was the visible boundary between civilization and barbarism, between the cultivated lands where people lived in permanent settlements and followed Confucian virtues, and the wild steppes where nomads roamed without fixed homes or civilized order. The wall was a statement, carved in stone and brick, that there was a fundamental difference between the Chinese and the peoples beyond, and that this difference was important enough to defend with treasure and blood across generations. This symbolic function grew more important as the wall's military function slowly declined. The Ming Dynasty, which invested so heavily in rebuilding and extending the wall, eventually fell not to Mongol invasions from the north but to internal rebellion and Manchu conquest in the 17th century. The Manchu, the Qing dynasty that replaced the Ming, had a different relationship with the northern frontier. They themselves came from beyond the wall, and once they conquered China, the barrier became largely irrelevant. There were no more barbarians to keep out because the barbarians were now the emperors. During the Qing dynasty, which ruled from 1644 to 1912, the Great Wall fell into disrepair. There was no longer the political will or financial resources to maintain it. Sections crumbled. Local people scavenged bricks and stones for their own building projects. The watchtowers, once hubs of military activity, became empty shells, homes for birds and small animals. The wall did not disappear entirely, it was too massive for that, but it faded from importance, becoming a relic, a reminder of an earlier age's concerns. Yet even as the physical structure deteriorated, its symbolic power grew. Chinese scholars and poets writing during the Qing period invoked the wall as a metaphor for permanence, for the endurance of Chinese civilization through all its trials. The wall became romantic, a subject for artwork and literature, no longer a workplace but a monument. Travelers began to visit it, not for military purposes, but simply to see this remnant of past glory, to stand on the ancient stones and imagine the history they represented. The wall's transformation into a global symbol accelerated in the modern era, particularly after the fall of the Qing dynasty and the establishment of the Republic of China, and later the People's Republic. For 20th century China, struggling with modernization, foreign invasion, civil war, and political transformation, the Great Wall became a powerful emblem of national identity and resilience. It represented a China that had endured for thousands of years, that had built monuments of unmatched scale, that could survive any challenge. The communist government that came to power in 1949 initially had an ambivalent relationship with the wall, seeing it as a symbol of feudal excess and the exploitation of peasant labor. But gradually, the wall was reinterpreted as a testament to the Chinese people's strength and capability. A monument built not by emperors, but by the collective labor of millions of ordinary people. This interpretation aligned with communist ideology, celebrating the working masses while still claiming the wall's grandeur for the Chinese nation. Major restoration efforts began in the 1950s and expanded dramatically in the 1980s as China opened to tourism. Sections of the wall near Beijing were carefully restored to pristine condition, rebuilt to look as they might have during the Ming Dynasty's height. These restored sections, places like Badaling and Muqianyu, became major tourist destinations, visited by millions of people each year from around the world. The wall became China's most recognizable symbol, appearing on postcards, in films, as a shorthand for Chinese civilization itself. But this tourism and restoration created a strange duality. The restored sections are magnificent, impressive in their scale and solidity, but they are in some ways false, too perfect, too clean, bearing little resemblance to the reality of the working wall as it existed during its active use. They are more like museum exhibits than historical structures, carefully maintained to create a particular impression. The actual historical wall, the vast majority of its length, remains unrestored, crumbling slowly in remote mountains and deserts, accessible only to those willing to hike for days through difficult terrain. This unrestored wall, often called the Wild Wall by modern hikers and photographers, is in many ways more authentic, more moving than the polished tourist sections. Here you can see the original construction techniques, the way the wall adapted to terrain, the marks of the workers who built it. You can see how time and weather have worn the structure, how it is slowly being reclaimed by nature. Standing on these remote sections, far from any crowds, you can more easily imagine what it must have been like for the soldiers and workers whose lives were shaped by this barrier. The legends and myths that surround the wall have multiplied over centuries. The most famous is probably the claim that the Great Wall is visible from space, a notion that persists despite being thoroughly debunked by astronauts and scientists. The wall is certainly massive, but it is also narrow, no wider than a typical road, and from orbit it is invisible to the naked eye, no more visible than any other human construction of similar width. But the myth persists because people want it to be true, want the wall to be so grand that it transcends normal human scale. Other legends are older and more rooted in the reality of the wall's construction. The story of Meng Dynasty, the woman whose tears supposedly made the wall collapse to reveal her husband's bones, has been told in countless versions for more than 2,000 years. It is not historically true. There was no actual woman whose grief had such power. But the story endures because it captures an emotional truth about the wall, that it was built at terrible human cost, that behind the grandeur lie countless individual tragedies, that for every meter of stone there were real people who suffered and died. Modern archaeology has revealed much about the wall's actual construction and use. Excavations have uncovered the remains of workers' camps, the tools they used, the food they ate. Studies of the wall's construction techniques have revealed the evolution of building methods over centuries. Analysis of written records has given us detailed information about garrison life, supply systems, and military operations. We know far more about the historical reality of the wall than any previous generation. Yet despite all this knowledge, or perhaps because of it, the wall retains its power to move and inspire. To stand on the wall, even on a crowded tourist section, is to feel a connection to history, to the countless individuals who built and defended and maintained this structure across so many generations. It is to confront the scale of human ambition and capability, and also the scale of human suffering and sacrifice. The wall is simultaneously a triumph and a tragedy, a monument to organizational genius and to the brutal exploitation that made it possible. For you, the individual who helped build it and then garrisoned it, who gave 8 years of your life to this structure, the wall means something different than it does to a modern tourist or a political symbol maker. To you it is a place of memory, both bitter and sweet. It is where you learned endurance, where you discovered strengths you did not know you possessed. It is where you made friendships that will last your lifetime, bonds forged in shared hardship. It is where you age beyond your years, where your body was permanently marked by labor and cold and deprivation. When you returned home after your garrison duty ended, you tried to resume your old life, but nothing was quite the same. Your children had grown without you. Your wife had learned to manage without your help. The village rhythms you remembered had continued without pause during your absence. You fit back in, eventually. But a part of you remained on the wall, on that remote watchtower, standing night watch and scanning an empty horizon. In your later years you sometimes told stories about the wall to your grandchildren, though you found it difficult to convey the reality of that experience to children who had never been farther from the village than the local market town. They asked if you were a hero, if you fought great battles, and you did not know how to answer. You were not a hero. You were a man who did his duty, who endured what needed to be endured, who survived when some did not. Is that heroism, or is it simply what was required? The wall stands today, more than 4 centuries after your time, and it will stand for centuries more. Parts of it are tourist attractions, carefully preserved and presented. Parts of it are slowly crumbling in remote wilderness, visited only by the occasional adventurous hiker or photographer. Parts of it have disappeared entirely, destroyed by time, weather, development, or deliberate demolition. But the idea of the wall, the symbol it has become, is perhaps more powerful now than it ever was when it served its original purpose. Modern Chinese take pride in the wall as evidence of their civilization's achievements. Foreign visitors marvel at its scale and age. Historians study it to understand the organization and priorities of past empires. Archaeologists excavate it to learn about construction techniques and daily life. Artists photograph and paint it. trying to capture its essence. The wall has become all things to all people, a mirror in which different viewers see different reflections. But beneath all the symbolism, beneath all the modern interpretations and uses, there remains the fundamental physical reality: millions of stones, carefully placed, mortared together, forming a barrier that winds across mountains and deserts for thousands of miles. Each stone represents human labor, human calculation, human decision. And while the names of those who did the work are lost, while the individuals are forgotten, their labor remains solid and enduring, testament to what human beings can accomplish when they organize their efforts toward a common goal, even when that goal exacts a terrible price, even when the individuals who pay that price are never remembered, never honored, never named except in the anonymous mass of those who built and defended and died for the Great Wall of China. And so we come to the end of our journey through time, our long walk along the Great Wall of China, and through the lives of those who built it, maintained it, and defended it across the centuries. We have stood in the pre-dawn darkness waiting for the drum that signals morning assembly. We have felt the weight of massive stones on our shoulders as we climbed steep mountain paths. We have watched beacon fires carry warnings across the mountains with the speed of light. We have endured winter cold that burned like fire, and summer heat that sapped the will to continue. We have known the loneliness of garrison duty on a remote watchtower, the desperate homesickness for family and village, and the strange, profound bonds that form between people who share hardship and danger. The Great Wall as it exists today is both the same structure we have experienced tonight and something entirely different. If you visit China and climb one of the restored sections near Beijing, you will walk on stones that might have been laid by the workers we have imagined. You will climb stairs that soldiers patrolled for centuries. You will stand on watchtower platforms where beacons once burned to signal danger. The physical continuity is real. Your hand rests on stone that other hands, countless hands across hundreds of years, also touched. But you will experience this in comfort and safety that would have seemed miraculous to those who actually lived and worked on the wall. You will arrive by bus or cable car, not by weeks of walking. You will buy a ticket, not be conscripted against your will. You will climb for an hour or two, then descend to restaurants and gift shops, not spend years of your life in isolated service. The wall has been transformed from a place of labor and hardship into a place of leisure and tourism, and this transformation, while making it accessible and preserving it for future generations, also distances us from the reality of its original purpose and use. Yet something of that original reality persists, if you know how to look for it, in the worn steps of a watchtower staircase, polished smooth by the passage of countless feet across centuries, in the finger-width gaps between bricks where mortar has eroded, revealing the imperfect craftsmanship of workers who were exhausted and underfed, in the way the wall curves to follow a ridgeline, evidence of the engineering decisions made by long-dead builders, in the remote sections that few tourists visit, where the wall is slowly crumbling, gradually being absorbed back into the landscape from which it was built. These are the places where you can still feel the ghosts, still sense the presence of all those who gave their labor and their lives to this impossible project. The wall teaches many lessons to those willing to learn them. It teaches about the capabilities of organized human effort, about what can be achieved when a society mobilizes its resources toward a single goal. It teaches about the costs of such achievements, about the suffering that grand monuments often conceal beneath their grandeur. It teaches about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, about how human societies have always struggled to define and defend boundaries between order and chaos, between the known and the unknown. It also teaches about impermanence and endurance. The wall was built to last forever, and in some sense it has succeeded. Parts of it are more than 2,000 years old and still standing. But it has lasted not because it is unchanging, but because it has constantly changed, been rebuilt, reinterpreted, repurposed. The wall of today is not the wall of the Ming Dynasty, which was not the wall of the Han Dynasty, which was not the wall of the first emperor. It is all of these, and none of these, a palimpsest of stone and brick and earth, on which each generation has written its own meaning. For the workers and soldiers whose lives we have imaginatively shared tonight, the wall was not a symbol or a monument. It was simply where they worked, where they served, where they endured. It was as ordinary to them as any workplace is to those who spend their days there. The profound meaning that later generations have found in the wall would have seemed strange to them. They were not building a wonder of the world. They were fulfilling their duty to the emperor, serving their terms of corvée labor or military service, trying to survive and return home. Yet their ordinariness, their lack of grand vision, does not diminish their achievement. Rather, it makes it more remarkable. They built something that has outlasted empires, that has become a symbol recognized around the world, and they did it without knowing that this would be the result. They did it not for glory, but for much more mundane reasons, because they were ordered to, because their families would be punished if they refused, because it was expected of them, because everyone else was doing it, because there was no alternative. From these ordinary human motivations, repeated across millions of individuals over many centuries, arose something extraordinary. The Great Wall stands today as a testament to human persistence and capability, but also as a monument to human cruelty and the capacity of organized societies to demand terrible sacrifices from individuals for collective purposes. It is important to hold both these truths simultaneously, to admire the wall's grandeur while never forgetting the cost at which it was achieved. Every stone represents labor, and much of that labor was coerced, extracted from people who would not have chosen this work, who lost years of their lives or the lives themselves to a project they did not design and whose benefits they rarely enjoyed. In this, the Great Wall is not unique. Most of humanity's great monuments, from the pyramids of Egypt to the cathedrals of medieval Europe to the massive infrastructure projects of the modern era, carry similar moral complexity. They demonstrate what we can achieve, but also what we are willing to sacrifice, and whose sacrifice we are willing to accept. Understanding this complexity is crucial to understanding human history, which is always a story of both creation and destruction, progress and suffering, achievement and cost. As we stand here at the end of our journey, looking back across the centuries we have traversed, the wall appears in the distance both as a human achievement and as a human story, the story of countless individuals whose names we do not know but whose labor remains embedded in every carefully placed stone. These individuals were not so different from us. They loved their families, hoped for better futures, feared pain and death, sought comfort and meaning in hard circumstances. They were simply people doing what people do, surviving, enduring, occasionally finding moments of beauty or connection or purpose in the midst of difficulty. The wall they built has outlasted them by centuries and will outlast us as well. It will continue standing, in some form long after we are all gone, carrying forward into an unimaginable future the evidence of past human effort and organization. Future generations will interpret it according to their own needs and understanding, finding in it meanings we cannot predict. But the stones themselves will remain silent and patient, bearing witness to the long human story of which we are all part, the endless struggle to build, to endure, to leave something behind that lasts. Thank you for joining me tonight on this journey to the Great Wall of China. Thank you for walking with me through the lives of those who built and defended this remarkable structure, for standing watch with them on cold nights, for carrying stones up steep mountains, for enduring the loneliness and hardship that was their daily reality. I hope that when you think of the Great Wall now, you will see not just an impressive monument but a human place, shaped by human hands, bearing the marks of human suffering and human persistence. The noise of the modern world awaits when you are ready to return to it. But for now, let these images and stories settle into your mind. Let yourself drift into sleep with the knowledge that all across history, people have faced challenges, have endured difficulties, have found the strength to continue when continuation seemed impossible. The wall stands as evidence of this, and we carry this evidence with us, a reminder that human beings are capable of remarkable endurance, remarkable achievement, even in the most difficult circumstances. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night. Dream of ancient stones and distant mountains, of beacon fires carrying messages across the darkness, of the long, slow turning of seasons on the Great Wall. Sleep well, and rest easy in the knowledge that the wall still stands, patient and enduring, a monument not just to emperors and empires, but to all those whose labor and lives went into its making, whose story we have told tonight, whose memory we have honored. Good night. The knock on the door comes before sunrise. You have been expecting it for weeks, ever since the imperial courier rode through the village reading the proclamation. Every third household must send one able-bodied man for corvée labor on the northern defenses. The term is 3 years. There are no exceptions. The wooden door of your family's modest home trembles under the pounding of fists, and your father rises first, lighting an oil lamp with shaking hands. His face in the lamplight looks older than you have ever seen it. Your mother is already weeping quietly in the corner. Outside, the village headman stands with 2 soldiers in quilted armor. They carry lists written on bamboo slips, names carefully brushed in black ink. Your name is there. They give you 1 hour to gather your belongings and say your farewells. You are permitted to bring a sleeping mat, 1 change of clothing, and whatever food your family can spare. Everything else will be provided at the work site. They tell you, though their voices carry no conviction. They have seen the conscripts return, those few who return at all, and they know what 3 years of labor on the wall means. Your mother presses a small cloth bundle into your hands. Inside is a pair of cloth shoes she has been making in secret, knowing this day would come. There is also dried fish, a handful of precious salt, and a small carved jade pendant that belonged to her mother. She says nothing, but her hands grip yours with desperate strength. Your father speaks quietly about duty and honor, about the necessity of the empire's defense, but his voice breaks when he mentions your younger brother, who will now have to manage the family's rice paddies alone. Your sister, barely 14, tries to be brave, but cannot stop the tears from streaming down her face. The soldiers are not cruel, but they are efficient. They have many names on their lists, many families to visit before dawn. They allow you these few minutes, but no more. As the sky begins to lighten in the east, you join a growing group of young men in the village square. You recognize most of them. There is Chen, who was supposed to marry the merchant's daughter next month. There is Old Wo's son, the quiet one, who could repair anything made of wood. There is the youngest son of the Liu family, who was studying to take the imperial examinations. All of you are now conscripts in the empire's great project of defense. The journey north takes 18 days. You walk in a column of more than 300 men, collected from dozens of villages across the province. The soldiers who escort you are professional troops, military men, who will serve as overseers and guards at the wall itself. They maintain order, but they are not harsh. They understand that exhausted workers are useless workers, and they allow regular rest stops, ensure that there is water, and do not push the pace beyond what the weakest among you can maintain. Still, each day brings blisters, sore muscles, and the growing realization that you are moving farther from home than you have ever been before. The landscape changes as you travel north. The flat rice paddies of your home give way to rolling hills, then to steeper terrain covered in pine and oak. The air grows cooler, the soil becomes thinner and rockier. You cross rivers on ancient stone bridges where the water runs swift and clear. You pass through market towns where local people watch the column of conscripts with a mixture of pity and relief that the quota did not fall upon their own families. In one town, an old woman gives you a steamed bun as you pass. She says nothing, but her eyes are full of understanding. Perhaps she once had a son who walked this road. At night, the column camps in fields or temple courtyards. The soldiers light fires and distribute rations from the supply wagons that follow the column. The food is simple but adequate. There is millet porridge, sometimes flavored with vegetables or tiny pieces of salted pork. There is weak tea. There is coarse bread made from ground sorghum. You eat together with the other conscripts, and slowly bonds begin to form. You learn their names, their stories, their fears. Some try to maintain optimism, speaking of the wages that will be sent back to their families, of the glory of serving the empire, of the skills they might learn. Others are silent, withdrawn, already grieving for the lives they have left behind. On the 12th day you cross a mountain pass and see, for the first time, a distant section of the wall. It appears on the horizon like a thread laid across the ridgeline of a far mountain, impossibly thin and fragile from this distance. But as you draw closer over the following days, its true scale begins to reveal itself. The thread becomes a ribbon, then a road, then finally a massive fortification of grey stone and red brick that marches across the landscape with absolute determination, climbing slopes that seem too steep for any structure to follow, dipping into valleys only to rise again on the other side, continuing endlessly toward both horizons until it disappears in the haze of distance. By the 15th day, you are walking parallel to the wall, though still several miles to the south. You can see the watchtowers now, square structures rising every few hundred yards along the wall's length, each one higher than the tallest building in your village. You can see the crenellations along the parapet, the walkway that runs along the top of the wall itself. You can even make out tiny figures moving along that walkway, soldiers on patrol, so distant they look like ants crawling along a garden wall. The wall is more massive than anything you could have imagined, and you begin to understand why 3 years of your life will be given to its construction and maintenance. On the 18th day, the column leaves the main road and follows a rough track that climbs into the mountains. The air here is thin and cold. Even though it is late spring, snow still clings to the shadowed northern slopes. The track becomes steeper, more difficult. Some of the men are struggling now, unused to the altitude and the exertion. The soldiers call for more frequent rest stops. Finally, as the sun begins to set, you round a final bend and see the construction camp spread out before you in a mountain valley. It is a city of temporary structures, hundreds of low barrack buildings made from timber and thatch, arranged in neat rows like a military encampment. There are larger buildings that must be workshops, storehouses, and administrative offices. There are corrals holding oxen and horses. There are cook fires sending thin columns of smoke into the evening air. And beyond it all, dominating everything, rising directly from the mountainside itself, is the wall. This close, it is overwhelming. The stones at its base are taller than a man. The wall face rises 30 feet into the air, its top edge still lost in scaffolding and construction. Thousands of workers swarm over it like termites on a mound, tiny figures hauling loads, positioning stones, spreading mortar. The sound of hammers striking stone echoes across the valley, a constant percussive rhythm that will become the soundtrack to your life for the next 3 years. You are processed quickly but thoroughly. Your name is recorded by a clerk who sits at a wooden table in one of the administrative buildings. You are assigned to a work gang, given a barrack number, and issued your tools. The tools are simple: a hemp rope, a wooden carrying pole, a woven basket, and a small iron hammer. These will become extensions of your body. You will learn to hate them and depend on them in equal measure. You are also issued a padded jacket, rough cotton trousers, and a pair of straw sandals. The sandals will wear through in a matter of weeks. You will learn. After that, you will wrap your feet in cloth and hope for the best. Your barrack is a long, low building with a packed earth floor and sleeping platforms along both walls. Each man is allocated a space barely wide enough to lie down, marked by thin raid mats. There is no privacy, no personal space. The air inside smells of sweat, smoke, and the peculiar musty scent of too many people living in too small a space. Your neighbors on the sleeping platform introduce themselves. To your left is a man from Shanxi province who has been here for 14 months already. His hands are covered in thick calluses and old scars. He tells you that the work is hard but survivable if you are smart and careful. To your right is a boy who cannot be more than 16, conscripted because he was the only son in a family of daughters. He is terrified, though he tries to hide it. That first night you cannot sleep. The sounds of the camp are unfamiliar and unsettling. Men snore, cough, murmur in their sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a work gang is still laboring by torchlight, and you can hear their rhythmic chanting as they haul stone. The stars through the cracks in the roof are the same stars you saw from your village, but they feel different here, colder and more remote. You think of your family, of your mother's face, of the rice paddies that will need tending, of the life you have left behind. You wonder if you will survive the 3 years. You wonder if the wall is worth this sacrifice. And then, exhausted beyond measure, you finally fall into a dreamless sleep. Before you can understand the wall that now dominates your life, you must understand its history, the layers of stone and earth and human ambition that lie beneath the section you will help to build. The wall beneath your feet is not the first to stand here, nor even the second. It is the latest iteration of a project that has consumed the resources and lives of empires for more than 1700 years. The story begins in an age of chaos, in a period the scholars call the Warring States, when China was not one empire but 7 kingdoms locked in endless conflict. It was during this time, in the 4th and 3rd centuries before the birth of Christ, that the first defensive walls were built. These were not the stone and brick structures you see today, but rather simpler earthworks, barriers of pounded earth and timber constructed by individual states to protect their borders from rival kingdoms and from the nomadic peoples who roamed the grasslands to the north. The technique used for these early walls was called rammed earth construction. and it is still employed in the sections of the wall that cross desert and grassland terrain. The process is labor-intensive, but effective. Workers would build wooden frames, then fill these frames with layers of loose earth mixed with gravel and lime. Using wooden or stone hammers, teams of men would pound the earth down, compacting each layer until it became nearly as hard as stone. Layer upon layer would be added, the frames would be raised, and gradually a wall would emerge, thick and solid, capable of withstanding both weather and assault. The man who first conceived of connecting these separate walls into a single continuous barrier was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, the founder of unified China. In the year 221 BC, after decades of brutal warfare, he finally conquered the last of the rival kingdoms and proclaimed himself emperor of all under heaven. His vision was absolute: one empire, one currency, one system of weights and measures, one form of writing, and one great wall to protect it all from the barbarian north. The first emperor's wall was primarily an expansion and connection of existing structures. He ordered his generals to link the old walls of the northern kingdoms, filling in the gaps, extending the barrier westward into the desert and eastward toward the sea. The scale of this project was staggering. Hundreds of thousands of workers were conscripted, perhaps as many as 1 million over the course of the construction. Soldiers, peasants, and prisoners were all pressed into service. They worked under brutal conditions, in scorching summer heat and bitter winter cold, with inadequate food and shelter. The human cost was horrific. The old workers in your camp tell stories passed down through generations, stories of workers dying by the thousands, their bodies built into the wall itself when there was no time or energy to provide proper burial. They speak of the legend of Meng Dynasty, the woman whose husband was conscripted to build the first emperor's wall. When news came that he had died during the construction, she journeyed to the wall to find his body. Her weeping was so bitter and prolonged that the wall itself collapsed, revealing the bones of her husband among the countless dead. It is only a legend, they say, but every legend contains a grain of truth, and the truth of the wall is that it is built on a foundation of human suffering. After the death of the first emperor, the wall entered a long period of neglect. New dynasties rose and fell, and each had a different relationship with the Great Barrier. The Han Dynasty, which ruled for 4 centuries, beginning in 206 BC, extended the wall far to the west, pushing it deep into the desert regions of what is now Gansu province. Their goal was not just defense but control of the Silk Road, the trade route that brought precious goods from the distant markets of Central Asia and beyond. The Han emperors built a string of watchtowers and small forts extending from the main wall, creating a network of defensive positions that protected the caravans carrying silk, jade, and spices. But the wall was never a perfect defense. It was too long to be fully garrisoned, too porous to prevent all incursions. Nomadic raiders learned to find the weak points, the sections where the wall had crumbled or where guards were few. Sometimes they simply went around it, riding far to the east or west where the wall ended and the empire's control faded into uncertainty. The wall was more than a military fortification. It was a symbol, a psychological barrier that marked the boundary between the civilized and the wild, between the settled agricultural life of China and the nomadic pastoral life of the steppes. For centuries after the Han, the wall was largely abandoned. New dynasties focused their resources elsewhere. Some emperors considered the wall a waste, a relic of ancient paranoia. The structure fell into disrepair. Wind and rain eroded the rammed earth. Wooden gates rotted. Towers collapsed. Local people scavenged the bricks and stones for their own building projects. The Great Barrier became a series of disconnected ruins, haunted places where ghosts of long-dead workers were said to walk on cold nights. Then came the Mongols. In the 13th century, the armies of Genghis Khan and his successors swept across Asia, conquering everything in their path. The old walls provided no protection against these fierce horsemen who moved with terrifying speed and fought with unprecedented skill. China fell under Mongol rule, and for nearly a century, the Yuan dynasty governed from Beijing. The wall was irrelevant because the builders and the barbarians were now one and the same. But empires rise and fall in their seasons, and the Mongol Empire was no exception. By the middle of the 14th century, the Yuan dynasty had weakened, corruption and mismanagement undermining its power. A series of rebellions erupted across China, and from these rebellions emerged a new dynasty, the Ming, founded by a former peasant, who would become the Hongwu emperor. The Ming emperors faced a familiar problem. The Mongols had been driven from China proper, but they remained a powerful force on the steppes beyond the northern frontier. They raided constantly, testing the borders, seeking to reclaim the empire they had lost. It was the Ming who made the decision to rebuild the wall on a scale, and with a permanence never before attempted. They would not rely on rammed earth alone, but would construct a wall of fired brick and cut stone, with elaborate watchtowers and garrison stations, with a paved roadway along the top wide enough for carts and cavalry. This wall would be a true fortification, a military infrastructure capable of resisting sustained assault and providing a platform for organized defense. The work began in earnest in the late 14th century and continued for more than 200 years. It became a permanent part of the imperial budget, a constant drain on resources and manpower. Each province of the empire was responsible for certain sections, and each province had to provide workers, materials, and funds. The system was organized with bureaucratic precision. There were quotas for bricks, quotas for lime, quotas for timber. There were inspections and quality controls. There were punishments for officials who failed to meet their targets, and always, there were more workers needed. You are part of this latest phase, this Ming reconstruction. The section of wall you will help to build is replacing an older section made of rammed earth and rubble that has stood here since the Han Dynasty. That ancient wall was never tall enough, never strong enough. It has eroded and collapsed in places, and it cannot support the weight of the new watchtowers the military planners have designed. So it must be rebuilt from the foundation up, using the Ming techniques of brick and mortar, creating a structure that the emperors hope will last forever. As you lie on your sleeping mat in the dark, hours before dawn on your first morning at the camp, listening to the breathing of the other workers around you, you think about these layers of history. You think about the first emperor's workers, who built the earliest version of this barrier 1700 years ago. You think about the Han soldiers who extended it westward. You think about the centuries of neglect and the recent decades of furious reconstruction, and you wonder what it means to be part of this immense continuity, this project that stretches across time almost as far as it stretches across space. You are just one man among thousands, laboring for just 3 years among the many generations who have given their strength to this wall. But in some small way your work will become part of something larger than any individual, something that will outlast the dynasty itself, perhaps outlast civilization. In the darkness this thought is both terrifying and strangely comforting. And then the drum sounds for morning assembly, and there is no more time for reflection. The work is about to begin. The drum that signals morning assembly beats in darkness, a deep booming rhythm that carries across the entire camp. You wake with a start, disoriented, your body aching from the hard sleeping platform and the previous day's journey. Around you, men are already rising, moving with the practiced efficiency of routine. This is their 100th morning, their 200th, and they know exactly how much time they have before the work begins. The washing facilities are basic. There is a long trough fed by a mountain stream, the water so cold it makes your teeth ache. You splash your face and hands, the shock of it driving away the last fog of sleep. Around you, other men are doing the same, some of them completely naked despite the chill, scrubbing away yesterday's grime. The older workers have learned that cleanliness is not a luxury but a necessity. Dirt in a wound can lead to infection, and infection at a place like this, far from proper medical care, can lead to death. Breakfast is served in a large communal hall. The meal is the same every morning. Millet porridge, thick and grey, seasoned with nothing but a little salt. Sometimes there are pickled vegetables, but not today. The portions are measured carefully, enough to fuel a day of hard labor but not a bite more. You eat quickly, hunched over your wooden bowl, using chopsticks worn smooth by countless previous users. The hall is warm from the cooking fires and from the press of bodies, and it smells of steam, smoke, and sweat. After breakfast, there is the tool distribution. You line up with your work gang at one of the supply sheds. An overseer, a man with a permanent scowl and hands like gnarled tree roots, checks names against his list and issues the day's equipment. You receive your carrying pole and baskets, your rope, your hammer. The tools are worn but serviceable. The overseer inspects each item before handing it over, checking for damage or weakness. A broken rope or a cracked basket can slow the entire gang's work, and slowness is not tolerated. The work gangs are organized with military precision. Each gang consists of 10 men, and 5 gangs make up a section under the command of a section chief. The section chiefs report to overseers, who report to the military engineers, who report to the civil administrators. Everyone has a place in the hierarchy, and everyone knows their role. Your gang includes the man from Shamsi, who sleeps next to you, whose name you have learned is Zhang. There is the frightened boy, whose name is Little Liu. There are farmers, a former shopkeeper, a disgraced minor official, and a man who speaks very little but whose hands move with the unconscious skill of someone who has worked with stone before. Your first assignment is hauling stone. The quarry is a mile from the wall, down in the valley where the mountain has been carved into terraces of exposed rock. The work begins with the quarrymen, specialists who use iron wedges and hammers to split the stone along natural fracture lines. They work with impressive precision, knowing exactly where to place the wedge, exactly how hard to strike. When a piece breaks free, they shape it roughly with chisels, creating blocks of approximately uniform size and weight. Your job is to move these blocks from the quarry to the wall. The blocks are massive, each one weighing as much as 2 or 3 men. Your gang of 10 approaches a shaped block, and Zhang, who has done this hundreds of times, shows you how to position the carrying poles. 2 strong wooden poles are slid through holes in a woven rope net that has been wrapped around the stone. 5 men take positions on each pole, lifting in unison when Zhang gives the command. The weight is staggering. Your shoulders burn immediately, your legs tremble with the strain, but you lift because there is no alternative. The journey from quarry to wall is a steep climb up a rough path. The gang moves slowly, carefully, Zhang calling out a rhythm to keep everyone's steps coordinated. If one man stumbles, everyone falls. If the stone shifts on the poles, someone could be crushed. You focus on the ground immediately in front of you, on maintaining your balance, on enduring the pain that radiates from your shoulders down through your entire body. You breathe in short, sharp gasps. Sweat runs into your eyes despite the cool mountain air. Halfway up the path, Zhang calls for a rest. The gang lowers the stone onto wooden supports placed for exactly this purpose. You drop the pole and bend over, hands on your knees, trying to catch your breath. Your hands are already blistering where they grip the pole. Zhang notices and shows you how to wrap cloth around your palms for padding. The rest period lasts 5 minutes, timed by a water clock one of the men carries. Then it is time to lift again, time to continue the climb. When you finally reach the wall, you deliver the stone to the builders, the skilled masons who will fit it into place. They barely glance at you as they inspect the stone for cracks or irregularities. Satisfied, they gesture for you to place it on a stack with others waiting to be used, and then you are dismissed to return to the quarry for another load. This is the rhythm of the work: lift, carry, climb, deliver, descend, repeat. You will do this 20 times today, carrying 20 massive stones up that steep path. Tomorrow you will do it again, and the next day, and the day after that. The work is brutally hard, but it is not without method or reason. The engineers have calculated exactly how many stones are needed for each section of wall, exactly how many gangs are required to deliver them, exactly how long each phase of construction should take. The work is broken down into manageable tasks, each one simple enough that a peasant farmer with no previous experience can learn it quickly. The complexity comes from the coordination of thousands of these simple tasks, all happening simultaneously, all fitting together like the pieces of a vast puzzle. As the days pass, your body begins to adapt. The blisters on your hands harden into calluses. Your shoulders and back develop new muscles, designed specifically for this one repetitive task. You learn the rhythm of the work, how to pace yourself so that you do not exhaust yourself by midday. You learn which paths are slightly easier, where to place your feet to avoid loose stones, how to shift the weight on your shoulders to ease the strain. You also learn about your fellow workers. Zhang, the man from Shanqi, has been here for 14 months. He was sent here after his village failed to meet its tax quota and his term of service was extended as punishment. He speaks rarely, but when he does, his advice is worth heeding. He knows which overseers are reasonable and which are cruel. He knows where to find the cleanest water. He knows how to identify the early signs of sickness and injury. Little Lu, the frightened boy, struggles with the work. He is not strong enough for hauling stone, and after a week, the section chief transfers him to a different task. He becomes a mortar carrier, delivering buckets of lime mortar to the masons. It is still hard work, but it does not require the same raw strength. Lu is grateful for the change, though he is embarrassed by his weakness. Zhang tells him quietly that strength is not the only thing that matters, that surviving 3 years requires wisdom more than muscle. The former shopkeeper, a man named Wang, tries to negotiate with the overseers, suggesting more efficient methods for organizing the work. The overseers are not interested in suggestions from conscript laborers. Wang receives a beating with a bamboo rod for his presumption. After that, he keeps his ideas to himself. The man who knows stone, whose name is Chen, eventually reveals that he was once a stonemason in a city, that he carved decorative reliefs for temples and wealthy homes. He was conscripted because he was accused of owing money to a local magistrate, a debt he insists was fabricated. But his skill is noticed by the master builders, and after a month he is transferred to work directly on the wall, fitting stones and checking levels. It is better work, slightly less exhausting, and it makes use of his training. He tries not to show his relief, knowing it would breed resentment among those still hauling. The work continues through all weather. On clear days the sun beats down mercilessly, and you work in a haze of heat and dust. On rainy days the paths become treacherous with mud, and the stones become slippery. Still the work continues. The only days the work stops are during the most severe storms, when lightning makes it too dangerous to be on the exposed mountain, or when the supply of materials runs out due to some breakdown in the logistics chain. Accidents are common. A man loses his footing on the muddy path and falls, breaking his leg in 3 places. He is carried to the medical tent, where an elderly physician sets the bone as best he can and wraps it in splints. The man's term of service is not reduced for his injury. He will remain at the camp, assigned to lighter duties once he can walk again, but his 3 years will still be served in full. 2 weeks later, infection sets in. The man develops a fever, begins to rave in his sleep. Despite the physician's efforts, he dies on a cold night, calling for his mother. His body is wrapped in reed matting and buried in the workers' cemetery on a barren hillside a mile from camp. There is no ceremony, no marker beyond a small stone. His name is added to the long list of those who came to build the wall and never returned home. Another accident occurs when a rope frays and breaks, sending a massive stone tumbling down the path. 3 men are in its path, and though 2 manage to leap aside, the third is caught. The stone crushes his foot so completely that amputation is the only option. The physician performs the surgery in the medical tent, using a saw designed for cutting wood and a hot iron to seal the wound. The man survives, but his usefulness to the wall project is finished. He is sent home early, a cripple who will struggle to support his family for the rest of his life. These deaths and injuries are recorded in official reports, but are not considered unusual or worthy of special note. The administrators accept a certain rate of attrition as the inevitable cost of the project. For every 100 men who arrive at the camp, they expect that 5 or 6 will die during their 3 years of service, and another 10 will be permanently injured. These numbers are factored into the planning, into the calculation of how many new conscripts must be brought in each season to maintain the workforce. Despite the hardship and danger, there are moments of unexpected beauty in this life. Sometimes in the early morning, when you first emerge from the barracks, the wall is illuminated by the rising sun, and the stones seem to glow gold and amber. Sometimes when you pause to rest during the climb up the mountain, you can look out across the valley and see the entire sweep of the landscape, the mountains receding into blue distance, the terraced fields in the valleys below, the thin line of the wall marching away toward the horizon. In these moments, you feel a strange, complicated emotion. Part pride, perhaps, that you are contributing to something so vast and enduring. Part despair, that you are trapped in a system that consumes lives so casually. Part simple awe at the scale of human ambition and effort. Evenings bring a brief respite. When the drum sounds to end the day's work, there is a rush to the washing troughs, then to the mess hall for the evening meal. The food is better than breakfast, usually rice or wheat noodles with vegetables, sometimes with small pieces of pork or fish. After eating, there are a few hours before the lights out drum, and men use this time in different ways. Some gamble, playing dice games or card games with worn decks, betting the small copper coins they receive as wages. Some write letters home, dictating their words to the few men in camp who are literate. Some simply sleep, too exhausted to do anything else. You write a letter to your mother, paying one of the literate men a few coppers to brush the characters onto rough paper. You tell her that you are well, that the work is hard but bearable, that you think of the family every day. You do not tell her about the accidents, about the fear that haunts your dreams, about the way your body aches in ways you did not know were possible. You ask about your brother and sister, about the rice paddies, about the village. You end by saying that you count the days until you can return home. The letter will be carried south with the next supply convoy, and if fortune favors you, it will reach your village in 2 or 3 months. If your mother can afford to pay a scribe, she may send a reply, and you might receive it before the year ends. At night, lying on your mat, you can hear the wall. It sounds strange to say, but it is true. The structure is never silent. The stone contracts as it cools from the day's heat, creating small pops and cracks. The wind passes over the irregular surface, producing a low, constant whisper. Sometimes you hear the footsteps of the night watch, soldiers patrolling the top of the wall, ensuring that no one attempts to flee the camp by climbing over. Sometimes you hear the distant howl of wolves in the mountains beyond. And sometimes in that space between waking and sleep, you imagine you can hear the voices of all those who came before, all the workers across all the centuries. Their whispers embedded in the stone itself, a chorus of endurance and suffering and stubborn human persistence. Then sleep claims you, and the voices fade, and you sink into the dreamless exhaustion that has become your only reliable escape from this hard, unforgiving life. As the weeks turn into months, you begin to understand the wall not just as a place of labor, but as a masterpiece of engineering, a structure whose complexity and sophistication far exceed anything visible to the casual observer. The wall appears simple from a distance, just a barrier of stone stretching across the mountains. But up close, involved in its construction, you see the genius embedded in every element of its design. The foundation is where everything begins, and it is here that the greatest care is taken. The master builders, men who have spent decades learning their craft, personally oversee this critical phase. Before a single stone can be placed, the ground must be prepared. On level terrain, this is relatively straightforward. Workers excavate a trench 3 to 4 feet deep, removing loose soil until they reach bedrock or hard-packed earth. But in the mountains, where much of the wall must be built, the terrain is rarely level or stable. You watch as the engineers use plumb lines and water levels to determine the precise path the wall will follow across a steep mountainside. They have chosen to follow the ridgeline, taking advantage of the natural defensive position, but this means the foundation must be cut directly into the slope. Work gangs use picks and shovels to carve a level platform from the living rock, creating a shelf that can support the wall's immense weight. The excavated stone is not wasted. It is broken into smaller pieces and used as foundation fill. Once the excavation is complete, the foundation is laid. Large, roughly cut stones are placed in carefully arranged patterns, each one positioned to distribute weight evenly. The spaces between stones are filled with smaller rocks and gravel, and everything is compacted with heavy stone hammers. Then comes the first layer of mortar, a mixture of lime, clay, and water that hardens into something nearly as strong as the stone itself. The mortar is crucial, and its preparation is a science in itself. You are assigned for a week to work in the lime kilns, and here you learn about the chemistry of construction. The process begins with limestone, quarried from specific deposits known to produce the best quality material. The limestone is loaded into large dome-shaped kilns, built from brick and stone. Wood fires burn continuously beneath the kilns, heating the limestone to extreme temperatures. Over the course of several days, the heat drives off the carbon dioxide trapped in the stone, transforming calcium carbonate into quicklime. The quicklime is then carefully transferred to slaking pits, large wooden vats where it is mixed with precise amounts of water. This reaction is violent and dangerous. The lime boils and steams, releasing intense heat. Workers must be careful not to splash the caustic mixture, which can cause severe burns. Once slaked, the lime becomes calcium hydroxide, a thick paste that is the basis for the mortar. To this is added clay for workability and sometimes rice paste for additional binding strength. The proportions must be exact, and experienced mortarmen guard their recipes carefully, knowing that weak mortar can doom an entire section of wall. The bricks themselves are another marvel of organized production. Somewhere down in the valley, there are enormous brick kilns running constantly, each one capable of firing thousands of bricks at a time. You never see these kilns yourself, but you see their product arriving at the wall in endless wagon trains. Each brick is approximately 15 inches long, 7 inches wide, and 3 inches thick. They are remarkably uniform, stamped with marks indicating which kiln produced them, and sometimes the date of manufacture. This standardization is essential. It allows the masons to work quickly, knowing that each brick will fit properly with its neighbors. The bricks are made from clay, excavated from specific deposits. Clay with the right mixture of minerals and the right plasticity. The clay is mixed with water and sand, then pressed into wooden molds. The molded bricks are dried in the sun for several weeks, then carefully stacked in the kilns. The firing process takes more than a week, with the temperature gradually increased to avoid cracking. When complete, the bricks emerge with a characteristic gray color and a hardness that will resist weathering for centuries. As the foundation is completed, and the wall begins to rise, you see the sophistication of the building technique. The wall is not a solid mass of stone or brick that would be impossibly heavy and would require far more material than even the empire can provide. Instead, the wall is built with a double wall technique. Two parallel walls of brick or cut stone form the outer faces, each wall about 3 feet thick. The space between them, roughly 4 to 6 feet wide, is filled with rammed earth, rubble, and smaller stones. This core is compacted in layers, pounded down until it becomes solid and dense. This technique provides several advantages. It uses less of the expensive, labor-intensive facing materials while still creating a structure of great strength. The rubble core helps to drain moisture, preventing the freeze-thaw cycles that can crack solid stone, and it allows the wall to flex slightly during earthquakes, which are not uncommon in this region. A completely rigid structure would shatter, but the wall, with its combination of firm exterior and slightly yielding core, can absorb the shock and survive. Every few hundred yards along the wall, watchtowers rise. These are not simple additions but integral parts of the structure, carefully designed to serve multiple functions. Each tower is approximately 40 feet tall and 30 feet square at the base. The towers taper slightly as they rise, creating a stable profile that can withstand high winds. The ground floor of each tower is typically used for storage, housing supplies, weapons, and fuel for signal fires. The second floor contains living quarters for the garrison, with built-in sleeping platforms and a small brick stove for cooking and heating. The third floor is the watch platform, open to the sky but surrounded by high crenellated walls that provide protection for the soldiers scanning the horizon. The towers are connected to the wall itself through a carefully designed system of arched doorways and staircases. Soldiers can move along the wall from tower to tower, accessing the walkway that runs along the top of the wall's length. This walkway is paved with brick, wide enough for 5 soldiers to march abreast or for a small cart to be pulled along. On the northern side, facing the potential enemy, the walkway is protected by a crenellated parapet rising 6 feet high, with regularly spaced openings through which defenders can shoot arrows or crossbow bolts. On the southern side, there is only a low wall, about 3 feet high, enough to prevent someone from accidentally falling but not enough to provide cover. The assumption is that any attack will come from the north. The construction of the arches that support the tower doorways is particularly impressive. Wooden scaffolding is erected, and a temporary wooden former is built in the exact curve of the intended arch. Bricks are then laid on this former, starting from both sides and meeting at the top with a central keystone. The mortar is allowed to cure for several weeks while the former supports the weight. When the scaffolding is finally removed, the arch stands on its own, transferring the weight of the structure above down through the curve and into the solid walls on either side. It is a principle borrowed from ancient Roman engineering, refined and perfected by Chinese builders over centuries. Water management is another critical aspect of the wall's engineering. In this mountainous terrain, heavy rains are common, and water is the enemy of any earthwork structure. The builders have designed an elaborate system of drainage. At regular intervals along the wall, stone spouts project from the base, allowing water that accumulates inside the structure to drain away. The top of the wall is slightly crowned, sloping gently toward both sides, so rainwater runs off rather than pooling. In areas where the wall crosses a streambed or gully, special culverts are built, arched passages that allow water to flow through without undermining the foundation. You spend several weeks working on one of these drainage projects. A seasonal stream cuts directly across the planned route of the wall, and a culvert must be constructed before the wall can proceed. The engineering team has designed an arched tunnel, 10 feet wide and 8 feet high, that will carry the stream beneath the wall. The work is difficult because it must be done inside a temporary dam that diverts the stream's flow. The foundation for the culvert must be laid on bedrock, which means excavating through several feet of stream gravel and silt. The arch must be precisely calculated to support the enormous weight of the wall above, while allowing enough clearance for flood waters during the spring melt. As you help to place the stones that will form this arch, you are struck by the foresight involved. The builders are thinking not just about the immediate need, but about centuries of future use. They are building for floods that have not yet occurred, for storms not yet born. They are creating a structure that their great-great-grandchildren will depend upon. There is something humbling about this perspective, this long view of time. The wall's defensive features are designed with equal care. The crenellations along the parapet are not merely decorative but carefully calculated for maximum effectiveness. Each opening is just wide enough for an archer to aim and shoot while remaining mostly protected. The solid portions are wide enough to provide cover for a soldier to reload or rest. The height of the parapet is designed so that a man standing on the walkway can comfortably shoot through the openings while a man crouching is completely protected. At strategic points, the wall incorporates additional defensive structures. There are sally ports, small reinforced gates that allow defenders to exit the wall quickly to counterattack raiders. There are killing zones, sections where the wall narrows or turns sharply, creating bottlenecks where attackers can be targeted from multiple directions. There are platforms for artillery, though the artillery of this era is primitive compared to what will come in later centuries, mostly consisting of large crossbows mounted on frames and catapults for throwing stones or containers of burning pitch. The quality control system is rigorous. Each work gang has its mark, a simple symbol that is stamped onto the bricks they lay or carved into the stone they place. If a section of wall fails inspection, if the mortar is weak or the alignment is off, the responsible gang can be identified and punished. Punishments range from reduced rations to beatings to extension of service terms. The threat of punishment keeps the work honest, but more importantly, there is a certain pride among the craftsmen. The skilled masons in particular take satisfaction in their work, knowing that what they build will outlast them by generations. You begin to develop a sense for the quality of the work. You learn to recognize good stone, cut square with clean edges. You learn to judge the consistency of mortar, to know when it has the right texture and will bond properly. You learn to read the tension in a rising wall, to see the subtle signs that indicate whether the structure is settling evenly or beginning to lean. These are skills that would have taken years to develop in normal circumstances, but here, working every day with the materials and watching the master craftsmen, you absorb them quickly. There are innovations happening even now, refinements to ancient techniques. One of the master builders has developed a new method for waterproofing the interior walls of the watchtowers. He mixes crushed seashells into the mortar, and the calcium carbonate from the shells creates an especially hard water-resistant surface. Another builder experiments with adding iron rods into the structure at stress points, reinforcing the masonry in the same way that bones reinforce flesh. These innovations are carefully documented by the civil administrators, and if they prove successful, they will be incorporated into the official construction manual and used in all future sections of the wall. The sheer scale of the logistics is staggering when you stop to consider it. Every brick, every stone, every bag of lime has been transported to this remote mountain site through an elaborate supply chain. There are quarries operating dozens of miles away, sending cut stone on wagons pulled by oxen. There are brick kilns in the valleys, their smoke visible on the horizon. There are forests being harvested for timber for scaffolding and forms. There are lime kilns burning constantly. And all of this must be coordinated, timed so that materials arrive when they are needed, not too early to create storage problems, and not too late to delay the work. The administrative compound, which you rarely enter, is filled with clerks managing this complexity. They maintain inventories, track shipments, calculate requirements, and send requests back to the provincial capitals. They use abacuses to perform rapid calculations, determining how many bricks are needed for the next 100 yards of wall, how much mortar that will require, how much lime must be burned, how much clay must be dug. The efficiency of this system is a form of genius in itself, a bureaucratic and logistical achievement that rivals the engineering feat of the wall. As spring turns to summer in your first year at the wall, You watch a section of the structure finally reach completion. The last bricks are laid, the last mortar is spread, and the scaffolding is dismantled. The section chief organizes a small ceremony, offering incense and wine to the spirits of the earth and sky, asking for protection for the structure and blessings for those who built it. Then the administrative officials arrive for the final inspection. They walk the length of the section, examining every joint, every drainage spout, every detail. They check the alignment with surveying instruments, measuring the deviation from the ideal path. They test the mortar with hammers, listening to the sound, judging its cure. Finally satisfied, they stamp the official seal of approval, and the section is formally added to the empire's fortifications. Standing on top of this newly completed section, looking out at the mountains rolling away in every direction, you feel a complex mixture of emotions. Pride, certainly, that your labor has contributed to something so substantial and enduring. Exhaustion, because the work has been brutal and unrelenting, but also a kind of awe at what human beings can accomplish when organized toward a common purpose, even when that purpose is imposed rather than chosen, even when the cost in suffering is terrible. The wall stands solid and real, a human addition to the natural landscape, and it will stand long after you are gone, long after everyone who built this section has returned to dust. That, you think, is perhaps the only immortality most people can hope for, to leave something behind that lasts, even if your name is forgotten, even if your contribution is lost among the contributions of countless others. The wall remembers even if no one else does. Now imagine that years have passed. Your 3-year term of corvée labor has ended, and you have returned to your village. You have married, fathered children, worked your family's land. But the empire's need for soldiers is constant, and the Great Wall must be defended. When you are 30 years old, you are conscripted again, but this time not as a laborer. This time, you are enrolled as a soldier in the imperial army, assigned to garrison duty on the wall. You will serve for 5 years, stationed at one of the watchtowers you helped to build during your first service. The journey north is familiar now, though no less arduous. You travel in a column of new recruits, men from across the province being sent to replace soldiers whose terms have ended or who have died in service. The military escort is larger this time, and more disciplined. You are no longer a civilian laborer but a soldier of the empire, and you are expected to behave accordingly. There is basic training during the journey, instruction in drill and formation, in the use of weapons, in military protocol and hierarchy. When you arrive at your assigned section of the wall, you are assigned to a watchtower garrison. Each tower houses a permanent garrison of 10 to 15 soldiers, commanded by a sergeant who reports to a captain responsible for 5 or 6 towers. Your specific tower is located on a remote section of the wall, 3 days' march from the nearest major fortress. It is a small stone and brick structure rising from the wall's summit, offering a commanding view of the landscape to the north. The tower becomes your home, your workplace, your entire world. The ground floor is storage for grain, oil, coal, weapons, and other supplies.
Everything must be stored carefully, protected from moisture and vermin, inventoried and accounted for.
The second floor is living quarters, a single room with sleeping platforms along the walls, a small brick stove in the center for cooking and heat, a few rough wooden stools, and little else. The space is cramped when all the soldiers are present, but you quickly learn that the tower is rarely fully occupied. Half the garrison is usually on duty, either on patrol along the wall or standing watch on the top platform. Your sergeant is a career soldier named Jar, a hard man in his 40s, who has spent 20 years in the border army. His face is weathered like old leather, marked with scars from past battles and accidents. He is not cruel, but he is uncompromising. He explains the routine on your first day, and it is a routine that will structure your life for the next 5 years. Each day begins with morning watch. Starting 2 hours before dawn, 2 soldiers climb to the top platform and stand watch, scanning the northern horizon for any sign of movement, any hint of raiders approaching. The watch is cold, lonely work, especially in winter when the wind cuts through even the thickest padded jacket. You stamp your feet to keep circulation, blow on your hands and strain your eyes in the darkness, looking for what you hope you will never see. After morning watch comes breakfast, prepared by whoever is assigned cooking duty for the week. The army rations are better than the laborers' food was, but not by much. There is millet or rice, pickled vegetables, sometimes dried fish or salted pork. There is tea, weak but hot, brewed from leaves that have been used and reused until they have almost no flavor left. The soldiers eat quickly, without much conversation, focused on the simple comfort of hot food in cold bellies. After breakfast, there is maintenance work. The wall requires constant attention. Bricks loosen with frost and must be reset. Mortar cracks and must be repaired. Drainage spouts clog and must be cleared. The watchtower itself needs tending. The stove must be cleaned. The sleeping platforms must be swept. The weapons must be oiled and sharpened. Military inspections are frequent and thorough, and a slovenly tower will earn the entire garrison punishment duty. Several times each day, patrols walk the sections of wall between towers. These patrols serve multiple purposes. They check the wall's condition, looking for damage or weak points. They watch for signs of attempted breaches, places where raiders might have tried to climb over during the night. They maintain visibility, ensuring that any approaching force will be spotted while still at a distance. The patrols follow a set route and maintain a set schedule, and neighboring towers track their progress. If a patrol fails to appear on schedule, it means trouble, and a response team is immediately dispatched. The patrol work is tedious but essential. You walk the same route day after day, in all weather, seeing the same landscape from the same vantage point. In summer, the sun beats down on the dark stones, and heat shimmers rise from the wall's surface. In winter, ice makes the walkway treacherous, and you must move carefully to avoid slipping. The northern side of the wall facing the steps is windswept and harsh. The southern side, facing toward China proper, sometimes shows cultivated fields and distant villages, reminding you of the world you are defending. The beacon fire system is the most critical responsibility of the wall garrisons. This is the Empire's early warning network, a communication system that can transmit messages across hundreds of miles in a matter of hours. Each watchtower maintains a beacon platform on its roof, stocked with fuel for signal fires. The fuel is a carefully prepared mixture of dried grass, sulfur, and wolf dung, which produces a distinctive thick smoke visible for many miles in daylight and a bright flame visible at night. The beacon codes are standardized across the entire wall system. 1 fire means raiders spotted, estimated strength less than 100. 2 fires means a force of 100 to 500. 3 fires means more than 500. A serious incursion requiring major military response. 4 fires means invasion in strength. An army. A crisis. You and every soldier in the garrison must memorize these codes perfectly. Lives depend on getting the signals right. Sergeant Zhao drills the garrison repeatedly on beacon procedures. The fuel must be kept dry and ready. The flint and steel must be tested regularly. The sight lines to neighboring towers must be kept clear. When a beacon is lit, it must be tended continuously until the all-clear signal is received. You practice the procedure until it becomes automatic. You learn to estimate the size of dust clouds on the horizon, to distinguish between nomadic herders moving their flocks and mounted warriors approaching with hostile intent. For most of your service, the beacons remain unlit. Days pass, then weeks, then months. The routine becomes numbing in its predictability. Wake, watch, eat, patrol, maintain, eat, watch, sleep. The seasons turn. Summer brings scorching heat and occasional thunderstorms that drench the wall and everyone on it. Autumn brings cooler temperatures and spectacular colors in the valleys to the south. Winter brings bitter cold and howling winds that seem to cut through stone itself. Spring brings melting snow, flooding streams, and the gradual warming that makes life bearable again. The isolation is profound. Your tower is 3 days from the nearest town, a day's march from the nearest fortress. The only people you see regularly are your fellow garrison soldiers and the occasional patrol from headquarters. Supply convoys arrive once a month, bringing rations, fuel, replacement equipment, and letters from home. The arrival of a supply convoy is the highlight of existence, breaking the monotony, bringing news from the wider world. Letters from home are precious beyond measure. Your wife writes when she can afford to pay a scribe, telling you about the children growing, about the harvest, about village gossip. Reading these letters, you feel the distance like a physical pain. Your oldest child was 4 when you left. By the time your 5 years are complete, that child will be 9, more than half grown, and you will have missed all those years. Your youngest you have never met, born 3 months after you departed for the wall. The child knows you only through stories your wife tells. You write back when you can. Though opportunities are limited, paper is expensive, and finding someone literate enough to brush the characters is not always possible. Your letters are brief, carefully worded to avoid worrying your family. You tell them you are well, that the food is adequate, that the work is not too hard. You do not mention the isolation, the cold, the fear during the long night watches when every sound might be an approaching enemy. You do not mention the soldier who fell from the wall during an icy patrol and died slowly over 3 days while the physician could do nothing but make him comfortable. You do not mention the gnawing loneliness, the way your memories of home begin to feel like someone else's life. The other soldiers become your family in this isolated place. You learn their stories, their habits, their fears and hopes. There is old Chen, who has served on the wall for 15 years and plans to retire to a small farm when his term finally ends. There is young Wu, barely 18, terrified during his first months but gradually growing into the role. There is Sergeant Zhao, who never speaks of his life before the army but is rumored to have killed a man in a duel and fled to military service to escape execution. There is Li, the company gambler, who runs an endless dice game and somehow always ends up winning. There is Han, who can cook surprisingly good meals from the basic rations, who knows 100 ways to prepare millet so it does not all taste the same. In the evenings when the day's duties are complete, the soldiers gather around the stove in the tower's living quarters. In summer, this is social time, a chance to talk and tell stories. In winter, it is survival, huddling close to the small fire, trying to conserve warmth. The conversations range widely. Veterans tell tales of past battles, though the stories grow more elaborate with each retelling. Someone always has a ghost story, tales of haunted sections of the wall where the spirits of dead workers still wander. There are arguments about strategy, about politics, about whether the Empire's policy toward the northern tribes is wise or foolish. Some soldiers have brought musical instruments, and on rare occasions there is music. Lissi has a 2-stringed erhu that produces a haunting melancholic sound. He plays old folk songs from his home region, and the notes drift out into the night, a brief moment of beauty in this hard place. Sometimes the soldiers sing, rough voices joining in the choruses of drinking songs and work songs and ancient ballads about heroes and battles long ago. The gambling helps pass the time, though Sergeant Zhao keeps a close watch to ensure it does not get out of hand. Soldiers gamble their meager wages, bet on dice and cards, on who can throw a knife closest to a mark, on how many steps it will take to walk from one tower to another. The stakes are small, but the competition is fierce. It is something to care about, something to break the monotony. The supply lines are the garrison's lifeline, and you come to understand just how complex and fragile this system is. Once a month, a supply convoy arrives at the tower, having traveled from the main fortress 3 days to the east. The convoy brings grain and other rations, calculated to last the garrison for 30 days. It brings lamp oil, coal for the stove, replacement clothing and equipment. It brings salt, tea, sometimes preserved vegetables or dried fruit. It carries messages from headquarters, orders and updates on military situations. The supply system extends in a vast network across the entire wall. Major fortresses serve as regional hubs, receiving bulk shipments from the interior provinces and redistributing them to smaller outposts. Granaries at these fortresses store reserves to guard against disruption. Wagon trains and pack animals move constantly along the roads behind the wall, carrying supplies forward and bringing reports back. It is a logistical achievement that requires thousands of people and animals, careful planning and coordination. When the supply convoy is late, as sometimes happens due to weather or broken wheels or sick animals, the garrison must ration carefully. The stores are managed with exact precision. Sergeant Zhao measures the grain daily, calculating how to stretch the remaining supply. The tea runs out first, then the oil for the lamps. If the delay extends long enough, the food rations are cut. You have lived through several such periods, and they are grim times. Hunger sharpens the cold, makes the work harder, shortens tempers. Relief when the delayed convoy finally arrives is profound. Disease is a constant threat in the close quarters of the tower. When one soldier falls ill, the sickness often spreads to others. There are respiratory infections that turn into pneumonia, dysentery from contaminated water, fevers of unknown origin. The garrison has basic medical supplies, herbs and ointments provided by the military physicians, but treatment is largely a matter of rest and luck. The sick soldier is isolated as much as possible in the cramped quarters, and the others hope they do not catch whatever is afflicting their comrade. You fall ill yourself in your 3rd year of service, a fever that comes on suddenly and leaves you weak and delirious for days. You remember very little of this period, only fragments, Sergeant Zhao forcing you to drink water and broth, the other soldiers taking your watch duties covering for you. The strange, vivid dreams where you are back in your village, but everything is slightly wrong, slightly off. When the fever finally breaks, you are weak as a newborn, barely able to stand. It takes weeks to regain your strength, to be able to perform your duties properly again. You owe your life to your fellow soldiers who cared for you when you could not care for yourself. There are moments of quiet beauty even in this hard life. Sometimes standing watch in the hour before dawn, you see the sun rise over the mountains to the east, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and amber. The wall stretches away in both directions, a dark line across the landscape, and for a moment you feel part of something larger than yourself, something that will endure long after you are gone. Sometimes on clear winter nights, the stars are so bright and numerous that they seem to fill the entire sky, and you can see the pale band of the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light. In such moments, the isolation seems less like a prison and more like a rare privilege, a chance to experience a kind of solitude and silence that few people ever know. The wall is never truly quiet. Even in the deepest night, there is always the wind, always the small sounds of stone contracting as it cools or expanding as it warms with the sun. There are the calls of night birds, the distant howl of wolves. There is the tramp of boots as the watch changes, the creak of the wooden stairs inside the tower. These sounds become so familiar that you barely notice them, but they are always there, the constant background music of life on the wall. As your service extends into the 4th and 5th years, you notice how you have changed. Your body is harder, leaner, adapted to the physical demands and the Spartan conditions. Your hands are covered in old scars and permanent calluses. Your face is weathered, aged beyond your years by sun and wind and cold. But the deeper changes are internal. You have learned patience, the ability to endure monotony without complaint. You have learned to find contentment in small things, in a hot meal, a dry sleeping space, a quiet watch. You have learned brotherhood, the bonds that form between men who depend on each other for survival. And you have learned, perhaps most importantly, the true meaning of duty, the ability to continue performing your role even when it seems pointless, even when you are tired and lonely and far from home, simply because it is your responsibility, because others depend on you, because the alternative is abandoning your post and betraying your trust. The end of your 5-year term approaches slowly, then suddenly. The final weeks crawl by, each day an eternity. Then the replacement soldiers arrive, young men who look as uncertain and overwhelmed as you did 5 years ago. You brief them on the tower's routine, show them where everything is stored, pass on the small tricks and techniques that make life a little easier. And then, almost before you realize it is happening, you are part of a column of soldiers whose terms have ended, marching south toward home. The journey south is strange. The landscape is familiar from your journey north 5 years ago, but everything seems smaller, less imposing. You carry with you the small personal belongings you have accumulated, a few changes of clothing, a carving knife, letters from home carefully wrapped to protect them from moisture. You also carry memories, experiences that have changed you in ways you are only beginning to understand. When you finally reach your village and see your family waiting, your wife older, your children grown almost beyond recognition, the youngest meeting you for the first time, you realize that you have returned. But the person who left 5 years ago is gone forever. The wall has marked you, changed you, and those marks will remain for the rest of your life. To understand life on the Great Wall, you must understand who threatens it from beyond. The northern horizon, the vast expanse of grassland and desert that stretches away beyond the wall's shadow, is home to peoples who have shaped their entire civilizations around mobility, warfare, and the harsh realities of the steppe. These are the mounted nomads, and they are among the most formidable warriors the world has ever known. The Mongols are the most famous, though they are not the only nomadic peoples who have pressed against China's borders over the centuries. Either there have been the Eshindu, the Eshundi, the Eshundi, the Chitan, the Yurchen, and many others. But in the era when you serve on the wall, during the Ming Dynasty, it is the Mongols who command the steppes, and it is the Mongols whom the empire fears most. They are the descendants of the armies that once conquered China itself under Kublai Khan, and though they were driven out more than a century ago, they have never forgotten that they once ruled the Middle Kingdom. The Mongols live a life utterly different from anything known in the agricultural heartlands of China. They are herders, moving with their animals across the grasslands, in an endless cycle dictated by the seasons and the availability of pasture. Their wealth is measured in horses, sheep, cattle, and camels. They live in felt tents called jurs, portable homes that can be dismounted and packed in a matter of hours. They have no permanent settlements, no cities, no fields. The steppe itself is their nation, vast and trackless to outsiders but intimately known to those who call it home. From childhood, Mongol boys learn to ride, to shoot, to hunt. By the age of 5, a Mongol child can sit a horse. By 10, he can use a bow from horseback. By 15, he is a warrior. The Mongol bow is a masterpiece of engineering. A compound bow made of horn, wood, and sinew, capable of firing arrows with devastating force and accuracy from the back of a galloping horse. Mongol warriors can shoot forward or backward while riding at full speed, can hit targets at ranges that would seem impossible to infantry archers. The Mongol horse is smaller than the breeds favored in China, but it is incredibly hardy, able to survive on sparse grass and harsh conditions that would kill larger animals. Each warrior typically has several horses, allowing him to switch mounts frequently during long rides covering vast distances with remarkable speed. A Mongol raiding party can travel 70 or 80 miles in a single day, appear suddenly where they are not expected, strike hard and fast, and disappear back into the steppe before any organized response can be mounted. But the relationship between the Mongols and the Ming Empire is not one of simple hostility. It is far more complex, a mixture of trade, diplomacy, and occasional violence. The Mongols need things they cannot produce themselves: grain, tea, silk, iron for weapons and tools. The Chinese have these things in abundance. When trade is open and functioning, when both sides benefit from exchange, there is relative peace. Mongol chiefs send tribute missions to Beijing, and the emperor sends gifts in return. Markets are established at designated points along the border, where Mongols can trade horses and furs for Chinese goods. But when trade breaks down, when the emperor closes the markets as punishment for some perceived slight, when drought destroys the grasslands and the Mongol herds are dying, when a charismatic leader rises among the tribes and unites them under his banner, then the raids come. These are not invasions seeking conquest, but rather strikes aimed at acquiring what cannot be obtained through trade: grain, livestock, captives, plunder. You learn all this from Sergeant Zhao, who has fought the Mongols many times over his career. He speaks of them with respect, even a kind of grudging admiration. They are the enemy, yes, but they are an honorable enemy. Warriors who live by a code even if it is not the Chinese code. He tells you that the Mongol raids follow patterns, seasonal rhythms. They come most often in autumn, after the summer rains have fattened their horses, before the winter cold makes long-distance travel too difficult. They come to the weak points in the wall, to sections where the garrisons are small or the fortifications are old and crumbling. For 3 years your tower sees no action. The beacons remain cold, the horizon remains empty of threats. But in the autumn of your 4th year of service that changes. It begins on a clear morning in late September. You are on morning watch, sharing the duty with young Wu, both of you scanning the northern landscape as the sun rises. The visibility is excellent, and you can see for miles across the rolling grasslands. At first there is nothing unusual. Then Wu points to the northeast, where a faint smudge of darkness seems to shimmer on the horizon. You watch carefully, and slowly, the smudge resolves into something more distinct, a dust cloud, moving steadily closer. This could be many things. It could be a herd of wild horses, or a Mongol clan moving their animals to new pasture. But something about the size and speed of the cloud makes Sergeant Zhao, who has joined you on the platform, tense with alertness. He watches for several more minutes, then makes his decision. Light the beacon, he says quietly. 1 fire, report it as possible. Raiders, strength uncertain. Young Wu has the beacon duty. He has practiced this procedure hundreds of times but never performed it for real. His hands shake slightly as he strikes the flint and steel, producing sparks that catch in the prepared tinder. The tinder smolders, then flames, Wu carefully transfers the flame to the beacon pile, and within moments thick white smoke begins to rise into the clear morning air. The smoke column climbs straight up in the still air, visible for many miles in all directions. Within 20 minutes, you see the response. The tower to the east, 3 miles away, lights its own beacon. Then the tower beyond that. The signal is being passed along the wall, racing toward the nearest major fortress where troops can be mobilized. To the west, the towers are also lighting their beacons, spreading the warning in that direction as well. The communication system is working exactly as designed. The dust cloud continues to approach. Through the long morning you watch it grow larger and more distinct. By midday you can make out individual riders, mounted figures moving in a loose formation. Sergeant Zhao counts carefully, using methods he has developed over years of experience. He estimates the force at approximately 80 to 100 riders, not a major invasion but a significant raiding party. He orders the second beacon lit, updating the warning to reflect the increased estimated strength. The Mongol riders do not approach the wall directly. They are not attempting an assault. Instead, they spread out along the base of the wall, staying just beyond effective arrow range. They are scouting, looking for weaknesses, testing the response. Some of them dismount and approach closer on foot, examining the wall's structure, checking for damage or low points where a crossing might be possible. Your garrison watches from the tower, weapons ready but orders are to observe unless directly attacked. The standoff continues for hours. The Mongols make no attempt to storm the wall. They know from experience that such attempts are costly and usually futile. The wall is too high to scale quickly, and defenders on the top have every advantage. Instead, the raiders are looking for what they always look for: an easy opportunity, an unguarded gate, a collapsed section, anything that might allow them to pass through without a fight. By late afternoon, the first response troops arrive from the eastern fortress. You can see the dust of their approach from the south, and soon a column of perhaps 300 cavalry appears on the road behind the wall. These are professional soldiers, well equipped and well trained, and their arrival changes the calculus for the Mongol raiders. The commander of the response force sends a detachment to your section of the wall, and within an hour, the ramparts are lined with armed soldiers, arrows nocked, ready for action. The Mongol raiders see the reinforcements arrive. They gather in a group. There is some discussion among them, and then in a coordinated movement that speaks to their discipline and training, they wheel their horses and begin to withdraw to the north. They do not flee in panic but retreat in good order, always maintaining their formation, always keeping scouts watching their rear. Within an hour they have disappeared back into the grasslands, leaving only the dust of their passage and the tracks of their horses in the soft earth at the wall's base. The response commander establishes his headquarters in your tower. He is a captain, a professional officer who treats Sergeant Zhao with the respect due a fellow veteran. The captain explains that the raiders were likely testing the defenses, gauging response times and troop strength. They were not committed to a serious attack today, but they may try again, perhaps at night, perhaps at a different section of the wall. For the next 3 days the response force remains in the area, patrolling heavily, ensuring the raiders do not return. During these 3 days you have a chance to speak with some of the response force soldiers. They are different from the garrison troops, more confident, more experienced in actual combat. One of them, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, tells you about the major battle fought 2 years ago, 50 miles to the west. A large Mongol force, perhaps 1,000 riders, had found a section of wall that had collapsed during a spring flood. They poured through the breach before it could be defended, raiding deep into Chinese territory, burning villages, taking captives and livestock. The Imperial Army had pursued them, and a running battle developed across 2 days of hard riding. The Mongols were finally cornered against a river, and a fierce fight erupted. The Chinese had superior numbers, but the Mongols had superior mobility and marksmanship. The battle ended when a relief force of Mongol riders arrived and helped their comrades fight their way across the river and escape back to the steppes. Both sides took heavy casualties. The scarred soldier shows you a Mongol arrow he kept as a souvenir, its iron tip sharp and deadly, its shaft marked with the distinctive painted rings that Mongol warriors used to identify their arrows. After 3 days, the response force departs, returning to their fortress.
Your garrison returns to its normal routine,
but the tension remains. Everyone knows the raiders are still out there, beyond the horizon. and they may return at any time. Night watchers become more vigilant. Every sound, every movement in the darkness could be an approaching threat. Sleep comes less easily, haunted by thoughts of silent riders scaling the wall in darkness, of arrows flying out of the night, of fighting hand to hand on the narrow walkway. 2 weeks later, the raiders do return, but this time they strike at a different section, 30 miles to the east. The beacon fires carry the warning, and the response is swift, but not swift enough. The Mongols have found a section where the wall is incomplete, where construction has not yet finished connecting an old watchtower to the newer wall sections. They pour through this gap, a fast-moving column of horsemen, and strike at a small market town 10 miles south of the wall. The raid lasts less than 6 hours. The Mongols take what they want: grain from the town's storehouses, livestock from the surrounding farms, whatever valuables they can grab quickly. They also take captives, young men and women who will be absorbed into Mongol society or held for ransom. By the time the imperial forces arrive, the raiders are gone, melted back into the vastness of the steppe, leaving behind burning buildings and traumatized survivors. This is the reality of the wall's purpose. It is not an impenetrable barrier. It is a deterrent, an obstacle that makes raiding more difficult and risky. It is a platform for observation and communication, allowing early warning and coordinated response. It is a symbol of imperial power and determination, a statement that the empire will defend its territory and people. But it is not perfect, and it cannot prevent all incursions. The nomads are too mobile, too skilled, too intimately familiar with the landscape. They will always find ways through, around, or over the wall when they are determined enough. Over the remaining months of your service, you participate in several more alerts. Most turn out to be false alarms, dust clouds that resolve into migrating herds or traveling merchant caravans. But twice more, Mongol raiders approach your section, and twice more the response forces arrive in time to deter an attempted crossing. You never actually fight the Mongols yourself. You never shoot an arrow at an enemy or cross swords with a raider. For you, the war remains one of watching and waiting, of tension and vigilance, of being ready for violence that usually does not come. But you understand now, in a way you could not have before, why the wall exists. It is easy to question the value of this massive structure, to wonder if the enormous investment of resources and lives is worth it. But when you have stood watch on a dark night, knowing that somewhere out in that darkness are warriors who would happily burn your village and enslave your family if given the chance, when you have seen the beacon fires carrying warnings at the speed of light across the mountains, when you have watched response forces mobilize and deploy with practiced efficiency, you understand. The wall is not perfect, but it is necessary. It is the empire's first line of defense, the barrier that makes the difference between occasional raids and constant invasion. The wall saves lives, protects communities, preserves the way of life of millions of people who never see it, who never know the names of the soldiers who garrison it, but who depend on it nonetheless. That understanding, hard won through long months of service, is perhaps the most important thing you take away from your time on the wall. The wall stands, and while it stands, civilization endures. The Great Wall, for all its imposing presence, for all the labor and stone that went into its construction, would be nothing without the intricate web of support that sustains it. The soldiers who garrison the towers, the workers who maintain the structure, the administrators who coordinate everything, all of them depend on a supply chain that stretches hundreds of miles back into the Chinese interior. Understanding this system is to understand how an empire organizes itself for endurance. The supply chain begins in the agricultural heartlands, in the fertile river valleys of the Yellow River and the Yangtze, where rice and wheat and millet grow in abundance. Here, tax collectors working for the imperial government gather grain from farmers as payment for their taxes. This grain is stored in massive state granaries, enormous structures capable of holding thousands of tons. The granaries are not merely warehouses but strategic reserves, insurance against famine and the means to feed armies. From these primary granaries, the grain begins its journey north. It travels by barge along rivers and canals, by wagon on imperial roads, sometimes on the backs of human porters when the terrain becomes too difficult for animals or carts. The journey is long and vulnerable to disruption. Weather can delay shipments. Bandits sometimes raid supply convoys. Officials at every level take their share. a form of corruption so endemic that it is factored into the logistics planning. A shipment of 1,000 bags of rice that leaves a granary in the south might arrive at its destination with only 800 bags, the rest lost to rot, theft, and official skimming. As the supplies move north, they pass through a series of regional distribution centers, each one responsible for a section of the wall. The main fortress in your area, 3 days' march to the east, is one such center. Here, enormous granaries hold months of supplies for all the garrisons in the region. There are also storehouses for other necessities: salt, tea, oil, replacement weapons and armor, tools, clothing, medicine, and the specialized materials needed for maintaining the wall itself: lime for mortar, bricks, iron fittings. The fortress is a bustling place, almost a small city. It houses not only soldiers but also the army of administrators, clerks, and laborers who make the military machine function. There are scribes who maintain detailed inventories, recording every sack of grain, every bundle of arrows. There are weighers who verify shipments. There are inspectors who check quality, ensuring that grain has not gone moldy, that weapons are not defective. There are veterinarians who care for the thousands of horses and oxen used for transport. There are blacksmiths, carpenters, and masons who produce and repair equipment. Once a month, as regular as the moon's cycle, a supply convoy is organized to service your tower and the other towers in the immediate area. The convoy is both a military and logistical operation. It consists of several heavily loaded wagons, each pulled by a team of oxen, escorted by a squad of soldiers for protection against bandits or raiders. The convoy follows established routes, roads that the army maintains specifically for this purpose. The arrival of the supply convoy at your tower is always a moment of relief and celebration. You hear the wagons before you see them. The creak of wooden wheels, the lowing of the oxen, the voices of the teamsters urging their animals forward. The convoy pulls up to the base of the wall, and the unloading begins immediately. Everything must be carried up the stairs to the tower's storage room, a laborious process that occupies the entire garrison for hours. The supplies are carefully counted and verified against the requisition list that accompanied the convoy. Sergeant Zhao personally oversees this process, checking every item, noting any discrepancies. The grain sacks are stacked in the storage room, arranged so that the oldest grain is used first, rotating the stock to prevent spoilage. The salt, precious and essential, is stored in sealed containers to keep it dry. The tea is wrapped in oiled paper. The oil for the lamps is in clay jugs, carefully sealed with wax. The convoy also brings mail, and this is perhaps the most precious cargo of all. Letters from home, official dispatches from headquarters, sometimes even newspapers from Beijing, weeks or months out of date, but still offering a window into the wider world beyond the wall. The soldiers gather eagerly around Sergeant Zhao as he sorts the letters, calling out names. Some men receive multiple letters, others receive none, and the disappointment on their faces is painful to see. Along with supplies, the convoys sometimes bring new soldiers, replacements for those whose terms have ended or who have died or been invalided out of service. These new men are disoriented, overwhelmed by their first sight of the wall and the harsh reality of garrison life. The veterans watch them with a mixture of sympathy and amusement, remembering their own first days. Sometimes the convoys carry soldiers leaving, men whose service is complete, heading back towards civilization and home. You watch these departures with envy, counting down the months until it will be your turn. The logistics of feeding the wall are staggering when you consider the full scope. Thousands of towers, each housing 10 to 20 soldiers, stretching across hundreds of miles. Each garrison needs approximately 1 bag of grain per soldier per month, plus vegetables, salt, oil, tea, and meat when available. This means tens of thousands of bags of grain must be transported monthly just to feed the wall's defenders. The math is overwhelming, yet somehow the system functions month after month, year after year. The supply chain extends beyond food. Consider the weapons. Each soldier carries a crossbow or a bow, a sword or spear, armor made of iron scales or thick quilted cotton. These items wear out, break, rust, bowstrings snap in cold weather, armor links separate, sword edges become notched and blunt. All of this must be replaced or repaired. The fortress maintains armories where skilled craftsmen work constantly, producing new weapons and refurbishing old ones. Iron is shipped north from mines in the interior. Skilled metal workers forge arrowheads, swords, and armor. Leather workers produce the straps and fittings that hold it all together. There is also the fuel supply to consider. The watchtower's stove requires fuel for both cooking and heating. In summer, this is a minor concern, but in winter, it becomes critical to survival. Coal is the primary fuel, mined from deposits in the mountains and transported to the wall. Each tower receives a monthly allotment calculated to provide minimal heating. The coal is rationed carefully, used sparingly, supplemented when possible with wood gathered by patrols. The beacon system requires its own supply chain. The special mixture used for signal fires must be prepared in advance, the dried grass and wolf dung collected and mixed with sulfur. This is produced at facilities behind the wall and shipped forward in sealed containers. Each tower maintains a stock sufficient for multiple beacon lightings, knowing that once the beacons are lit, they may need to burn for hours. Medical supplies are rudimentary but essential. Each tower receives a small kit containing herbs for treating common ailments, bandages, ointments for wounds, medicines for dysentery and fever. These supplies are managed by whoever in the garrison has the most knowledge of healing, usually one of the older soldiers who has picked up practical medical knowledge over years of service. Serious injuries or illnesses require evacuation to the fortress, where actual physicians are stationed, but this is a 3-day journey, and not all patients survive the trip. The entire supply system is vulnerable to disruption. A harsh winter can make roads impassable, isolating towers for weeks or even months. During such periods, garrisons must survive on their stored reserves, stretching rations, burning furniture for heat when the coal runs out, enduring until the weather breaks and supply lines can be reopened. Every soldier who has served on the wall has stories of desperate winters when survival became uncertain. There is also the problem of corruption. At every level of the supply chain, officials and middlemen take their cut. The grain merchant in a provincial city adulterates his product, mixing cheap millet with expensive rice. The transport officer diverts a portion of each shipment to sell on the black market. The convoy commander accepts bribes to overlook missing items. Even at the tower level, sergeants sometimes manipulate the system, reporting more soldiers than actually present and pocketing the extra rations. The Empire attempts to control this corruption through inspections and audits. Special officials, incorruptible in theory, travel the supply routes, checking inventories and questioning personnel. The punishments for proven corruption are severe, ranging from heavy fines to beating to execution for the most serious cases. But the system is too large, too complex, with too many opportunities for graft. Some level of corruption is tacitly accepted as the price of making the system function at all. Beyond the wall, parallel to but separate from the military supply chain, runs a civilian economy. Merchants see opportunity wherever there is a concentration of soldiers. Small market towns spring up behind the major fortresses, places where soldiers can spend their meager pay on luxuries not provided by the official rations. There are food stalls offering variety, spices, meat dishes and sweets. There are tea houses where soldiers can sit and talk away from military discipline. There are shops selling everything from extra clothing to writing materials to small religious talismans. There are also, inevitably, brothels. The military officially disapproves, but unofficially tolerates these establishments, understanding that soldiers long separated from family need outlets for natural urges. The women who work in these places are often themselves desperate, driven by poverty or debt into a life they would not have chosen. Some of them form genuine relationships with soldiers. Marriages sometimes result, and occasionally a soldier sends money from his pay to support a woman who has become, if not a wife, at least a companion and comfort in a hard life. This civilian economy creates its own supply needs. The merchants must be supplied, and caravans of traders move back and forth along the roads behind the wall, carrying goods to sell. These traders are tough, resourceful people, willing to brave bandits, weather, and difficult terrain for profit. They know the area intimately, know which garrisons have soldiers with money to spend, which fortresses have the best markets. Some become rich through this trade, accumulating wealth that would be impossible in the agricultural villages of their birth. The interdependence is total. The wall cannot exist without the supply chain, but the supply chain would not exist without the wall. The fortress towns behind the wall exist only because the wall creates demand. The merchants prosper only because soldiers need their goods. Farmers in provinces 1,000 miles away produce grain they will never eat, grain destined for soldiers they will never meet, who garrison a wall they will never see, protecting a frontier they cannot imagine. It is a system of vast scale and complexity, held together by bureaucratic organization, economic incentive, and the simple necessity of defense. During your 5 years on the wall, you come to appreciate this system in ways civilians never could. You understand that the rice in your bowl represents not just food, but an entire chain of human effort. The farmer who grew it, the tax collector who gathered it, the clerk who recorded it, the barge captain who transported it, the warehouse keeper who stored it, the convoy driver who delivered it. Each link in this chain is essential, and if any link breaks, you go hungry. This dependence creates a kind of humility, a recognition that you are part of something much larger than yourself, that your survival depends on the labor of thousands of people you will never know. It also creates frustration, when supplies are late, when rations are reduced, when the grain is moldy, or the tea is terrible, you cannot help but be angry. You know that somewhere in the system, someone failed in their duty, someone was lazy or corrupt or incompetent, and you are suffering the consequences. But you also know that the system, for all its flaws, generally works. The supplies arrive, the garrisons are fed, the wall remains manned. In a pre-industrial world, with primitive transport and communication, this is an achievement bordering on miraculous. The Great Wall is not just a physical structure, it is a logistical triumph, a demonstration of organizational capacity that few civilizations in history could match. And you, a simple soldier eating simple food in a remote tower, are both a product and a proof of that achievement. The Great Wall does not exist in a single moment, but across the endless turning of seasons, and each season brings its own character, its own challenges, its own particular beauty and hardship. To serve on the wall for 5 years is to experience this cycle more than once, to understand how the structure and the life it contains transform with the weather, the light, and the demands of the natural world. Spring arrives late at the wall, reluctant and tentative. While the plains to the south may already be warm and green, winter still grips the mountains well into what the calendar claims is the growing season. But eventually, sometime in late March or early April, you begin to notice the change. The air loses its knife-edge quality. The sun, when it appears, carries actual warmth rather than just painful brightness on snow. The ice that has coated the northern face of the wall since November begins to glisten with meltwater during the day, though it still refreezes each night. The melting brings its own problems. Water seeps into every crack and crevice in the wall's stonework, and when it refreezes overnight, it expands, pushing stones apart, opening gaps in the mortar. Spring is the season of intensive repair work. As soon as the weather permits, work gangs move along the wall, identifying damage from the winter, chipping out old mortar, replacing cracked bricks, repointing joints. It is cold, miserable work, kneeling on stone that is still almost frozen, hands numb despite cloth wrappings, but it is essential. Damage left unrepaired will only worsen, and by next winter, small cracks can become major structural problems. The spring melt also brings flooding. The small streams that trickle beneath the wall during summer become raging torrents in spring, swollen with snowmelt from the higher peaks. The drainage culverts are tested to their limits, and sometimes they fail. You have seen sections of the wall where the foundation was undermined by floodwater, where the structure shifted and cracked, requiring major reconstruction. The engineers are kept busy during spring, inspecting every culvert, clearing blockages, reinforcing weak points. But spring also brings relief from the brutal cold that has dominated life for months. The wind becomes gentler, less punishing. Birds return, migrating north, and their songs in the early morning are a reminder that the world contains beauty as well as hardship. The grasslands beyond the wall begin to green, transforming from lifeless brown to vibrant color seemingly overnight. You can see the Mongol herds moving back to their summer pastures, dark masses of cattle and horses flowing across the landscape like shadows. With spring comes the construction season. New sections of wall are begun, old sections are upgraded, and the work gangs of conscript laborers return to their camps after the winter break. The mountains echo again with the sound of hammers on stone, the shouts of overseers, the creaking of lifting equipment. Supply convoys become more frequent. Roads that were impassable during winter are reopened, and the entire frontier comes back to life after months of dormancy. Summer arrives suddenly, a dramatic shift from cool to hot that seems to happen in a matter of days. By June, the sun beats down relentlessly, and the dark stones of the wall absorb and radiate heat until walking the parapet at midday is like walking inside an oven. The soldiers adapt their schedules, doing heavy work in the early morning and late evening, resting during the worst heat of the day. Water becomes precious. The mountain streams that rage during spring melt diminished to trickles, and every drop must be conserved. The summer heat brings different challenges than winter cold, but it is no less harsh. Soldiers on watch duty suffer from heat exhaustion. Work gangs laboring on construction projects must rest frequently or risk collapse. The food stores become vulnerable to spoilage, and grain must be checked constantly for weevils and mold. Flies multiply, becoming a constant torment. There is no relief from them. They swarm around the cook fires, contaminate the food, and make sleep difficult with their incessant buzzing. But summer also brings abundance. The valleys south of the wall are productive. Farms are flourishing, and the supply convoys carry fresh vegetables as supplements to the standard grain rations. There are onions, cabbages, melons occasionally. The change in diet is welcome, a break from the monotony of millet and rice. Some of the garrison soldiers who have served for years have cultivated small garden plots near their towers, coaxing vegetables from poor soil. And in summer these gardens produce modest crops of beans, gourds, and herbs. The summer nights are short and relatively warm, almost pleasant. Off-duty soldiers sit outside the tower in the evening, enjoying the cooler air, watching the stars emerge. These are social times when the bonds between men are strengthened through casual conversation, shared jokes, and the simple companionship of people who understand each other's experiences without needing explanations. The professional soldier from the fortress visits occasionally, bringing news from the wider world, and these visits are highlights, opportunities to hear stories from beyond the narrow confines of garrison life. Summer is also the season when inspections are most frequent. High-ranking officers from the provincial capital make tours of the wall, checking readiness, reviewing troops, ensuring that standards are maintained. These inspections are stressful. Sergeant Zhao drives the garrison hard in the days before an expected visit, ensuring that everything is perfect, that weapons are polished, that the tower is spotlessly clean, that the soldiers can perform their drills without error. The actual visits are usually brief, but they can have serious consequences. A garrison that fails inspection may see its sergeant replaced, its rations reduced, or its soldiers assigned to punishment details. Autumn is many soldiers' favorite season. The oppressive heat breaks, replaced by warm days and cool nights. The air becomes clear and crisp, and visibility from the wall extends for incredible distances. The grasslands beyond turn golden, and the mountains to the south display brilliant colors as the leaves change. It is beautiful in a way that is almost painful, a reminder of the world's capacity for splendor even in hard places. But autumn is also the season of greatest danger. The Mongol raids come most often now, after the summer rains have fattened their horses, and before the winter makes campaigning impossible. The beacon fires are lit more frequently. The garrison stands more watches, maintains higher readiness. The response forces from the fortress patrol more actively, their cavalry visible on the roads behind the wall, ready to mobilize at the first sign of threat. Autumn is harvest season in the agricultural lands, and the wall's garrison knows that the grain they will eat through the winter is being gathered now. There is a race against time, to bring in the harvest before the first hard frosts, to transport it to the granaries before the roads become impassable. The supply convoys are larger and more frequent during autumn, bringing in stores for the long winter ahead. Each tower receives extra rations, building up reserves that will sustain them when resupply becomes difficult or impossible. As autumn progresses toward winter, there is a sense of urgency, of preparation for the hard months ahead. Firewood is gathered and stacked. Every crack in the tower's walls is sealed with mud and straw to keep out the wind. Winter clothing is distributed: thick padded jackets and trousers, felt boots, fur hats with ear flaps. The soldiers check and recheck their gear, knowing that a torn jacket or worn-through boots could mean frostbite or worse during winter. And then winter comes, and it comes hard. The first major snowfall usually arrives in November, and from then until March, the wall exists in a world of white and grey and bitter cold. The temperature drops far below freezing and stays there for months. The wind that blows constantly across the exposed ridgeline carries a chill that cuts through any amount of clothing. Ice forms on every surface, making the walkways treacherous and the watch platforms dangerous. Winter duty on the wall is survival. The watch rotation is shorter because no one can remain exposed to the cold for long without risk of frostbite. Soldiers on watch duty bundle themselves in every layer of clothing they own, wrap their faces in cloth, and still the cold finds ways through. Your hands become numb within minutes, your feet lose feeling, and the only thing that keeps you from simply giving up and seeking shelter is the knowledge that your fellow soldiers depend on you, that your duty matters, that abandoning your post could mean death for everyone. The tower becomes a sanctuary, but even inside, the cold is oppressive. The small brick stove provides some heat, but it is never enough. The garrison huddles around it, conserving fuel, rationing the meager warmth. At night, sleeping is difficult, despite exhaustion. The cold penetrates through all the blankets and furs, and you wake repeatedly, shivering, unable to get comfortable. You sleep in your clothes, in your jacket, sometimes even in your boots, because undressing means exposure to air so cold it hurts to breathe. Food becomes difficult during winter. The grain is fine, it stores well, but fresh vegetables are impossible. The diet becomes incredibly monotonous. Just grain and dried or pickled vegetables, occasionally some preserved meat. Water is a constant problem. The streams freeze solid, and snow must be melted for drinking and cooking, a process that consumes fuel and time. Sometimes the supply convoys cannot get through, blocked by snow or ice, and the garrison must stretch its rations, eating less, enduring hunger on top of cold. Despite the hardship, there is a strange beauty to winter on the wall. After a fresh snowfall, the entire landscape is transformed, the wall becoming a white ribbon across white mountains under a pale grey sky. The silence is profound, broken only by the wind and the occasional call of a raven. On rare clear nights when the wind dies and the stars emerge, the world seems magical, frozen in time, ancient and eternal. Winter is also the season when the wall is most secure. The deep snow and bitter cold discourage raiders. The Mongols stay in their winter camps, conserving their strength and their horses, waiting for spring. The beacon fires remain cold, the towers stand quiet, and the garrison's main enemy is not human but natural, the relentless assault of weather and cold. Spring eventually returns, and the cycle begins again. Each season leaves its mark on the soldiers who endure it. You learn to read the signs, to predict weather changes, to know when a storm is coming by the quality of the light or the behavior of birds. You learn what clothing works best in different conditions, how to conserve heat, how to stay dry in rain, how to avoid heat exhaustion in summer. You learn that the wall is not static but dynamic, constantly changing with the seasons, constantly demanding adaptation. After 5 years, you have experienced this cycle 5 times, and it has become part of you. Embedded in your bones and blood, the seasons on the wall are more than just weather. They are a measure of time, a structure that gives meaning to the endless days. Spring means renewal and hope. Summer means endurance and abundance. Autumn means preparation and vigilance. Winter means survival and waiting. And through all the seasons, the wall remains patient and permanent, outlasting every storm, every flood, every freeze, standing as it has stood for generations and will stand for generations to come, a monument not just to human ambition but to human persistence through all the changing faces of time and weather.